Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to introduce to you Julia Schopick. She's an author and also a journalist, and came to this field because, like many of us, a loved one, in this case her husband, came down with cancer. So she started researching. She has a blog, she's written books, and we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you, Frank. When I was a guest on Dr. Ron Hoffman's radio show, Health Talk, he said the name of my book. He said, Honest Medicine. Does that mean that you think a lot of medicine is dishonest? And I said, yep. And he said, you don't pull any punches, do you? And I said, nope. And then we were off and running. And I like to tell about that interchange, mainly because it is honesty that I hope to be known for with medicine, because I've been through so much with my husband's illness and then with all the research I've done, that I want to get the word out there about some very honest treatments, not the kinds of treatments that we're often told about by our doctors. I do want to say that I did not want to start out ever to be a best-selling author. And I didn't want to be a medical advocate. Actually, I don't love writing, and my family background taught me to be very wary of the medical system. So it was, as Frank pointed out, my husband's brain tumor that thrust me into being a medical advocate, being a health advocate, medical advocate. Skepticism about traditional medicine was inculcated into me very early. My dad was in my book I tell all about how my dad was a physician back in the good old days of medicine. They weren't so good. The 50s, the 60s, and into the early 70s. And he would tell me the most awful stories about his fellow doctors and about the medical system, which he said was just going in a very bad direction. And I can't tell you the things he said about his fellow doctors because I'd probably be chased out of the hall. But he did say one thing, and that was, if a doctor tells you he knows all the answers, run like hell. And so you can just imagine that I was not a fan of the medical system. Now, my mom came about it from a different angle, but she also taught me skepticism about the medical profession, and especially in her case, traditional medicine. Conventional medicine, let's put it that way. My mom, at the age when my mom was 11, her mother, my grandma Julia, was diagnosed with colon cancer. And Dr. Charles Mayo, the Charles Mayo, told her that she had 6 months to live. Well, I must be a chip off the old block of my grandpa, because he said, like heck she does. And he started researching, this was 1928, he started researching, and he found, this was before Hitler, because my family's Jewish, he found that in Germany and Frankfurt am Main, there was a experimental treatment called, guess what, radiation. And he got my grandmother there, and she was given radiation treatments, and she lived for 11 more years, making it so that my mom was 22, not 11. When she lost her mother. But my mom loves telling the story about how her mom was kept alive by a treatment that doctors didn't know about then in this country, and that Charles Mayo didn't know about, and he was, you know, the big god, right? But she also, and this is my mom, you have to know she's 94 years old, she loves telling about how Grandma Julia sent Dr. Mayo New Year's cards every year until he died. He died a few months before she did. You know, she must have been quite a pistol. Can you picture doing that? So she just gets a thrill. She gets a thrill out of it today, telling about this. So I'll bet you'd think that when my husband was diagnosed with a really serious brain tumor at the age of 40 in 1990, that I would know exactly what to do. All my memories of Grandma Julia and Papa Turrets, and my memories of my father, who was by this time not living anymore, but I would just be, you know, researching and all of that. No. I was like lots of you, lots of people that I know, maybe not lots of you. I was paralyzed with fear. I went into lockstep with what the doctors recommended, and my husband survived anyway. He had surgery, he had chemo, he had radiation, and basically, as I said, we did exactly what the doctor said. But around the 5-year mark, things started happening because the side effects of the treatments, not of the tumor, but of the treatments, started to really get pronounced. And they started taking over our lives. For instance, he had a radiation-caused stroke. I don't know if you know, radiation to the head can cause a stroke. He had hydrocephalus, which is water on the brain, for which he needed an operation. He had intermittent seizures, so he was constantly going back and forth into the hospital for sometimes more surgeries, not for brain tumor, but to correct the complications. And finally, a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, you know, he's doing really well in spite of the medical profession. I better get to it, and I better start trying to find, you know, solutions to keep him going for longer, keep him healthy, because he wasn't that healthy now. And so we found a nutritionist, Gene Wallace, whose area is cancer, and brain tumors in particular. So he was on lots of supplements, and he was also on a great diet. He started getting better. And I was over the moon about this. And the one thing that surprised me, though, this aha moment thing, was that his doctors could not have been less curious about what we were doing. They were like, you know, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And that puzzled me because he was, my husband ended up living 12 years beyond his prognosis. He was given 3 years to live, he lived 15. And I would say, you know, shouldn't they be curious about this? But no, they weren't. And you know what? Selfishly, I just was okay with that because at least I wasn't being stopped from doing what I needed to do to get him better. And I don't have much time to talk, so I won't tell you about all the treatments I found. But in any case, I had a second aha moment. You know, sometimes you get all these different lessons that you learn. And that was in 2001, my husband had a recurrence of his brain tumor. And this time, even though I thought he should not have the surgery, because when in 1990, I didn't tell you, but his skin had trouble healing. And especially if you've had radiated skin, you really have trouble healing. So I said, this one is going to be a disaster. And you don't know me, but I'm not usually a negative person, but I knew this was not going to be good, and it wasn't. His skin would not heal. And the doctors, what do you think they did? They did what they know how to do. They kept operating to try to find 2 pieces of skin on his head that would heal. Well, every time they would do another operation, he would get more brain injured. He had walked into the operating room telling jokes and being, you know, by the time he got the heck out of there, he was paralyzed, he was severely brain injured, he was incontinent, and he was going to die. So I mean, you can't keep having cranial fluid leaking out of your head. So then this now was the age of the internet, and I had learned, and I started going online and researching wound healing. And ironically, it wasn't I who found the treatment. It was a doctor friend whom I was working with for one of my clients. I do public relations in addition to being an author, and I found something called Silverlon. I actually, don't laugh, but I brought a sample. I'm going to be signing books, signing copies of my book out afterwards, and you can also check the Silverlon out. That was what we found that healed Tim's head. And this is when the real aha moment came, because I was so excited, you know, even though he was now brain injured and all of that, but he was alive. And what happened then was shocking. The doctors came around to me. They made it a point to say, we don't think it was what you found that healed his head. And one of them put it exactly like that, and he was one I could talk to. We liked each other. So I said, Bill, what do you think it was? He said, I've been thinking. And he furrowed his brow, and he said, I think it was the vancomycin. Do you all know what that is? That's IV antibiotic. I think it was the vancomycin that, I said, Bill, he's been on vancomycin for 6 weeks. He says, yep. Vanco is like that. It kicks in. There's a lawyer's term. My husband was a lawyer, mirabile dictu, miracle to say. On the very day that we put the Silverlon on his head, the Vanco kicks in. So I said something really bad is going on with this medical system. And I knew instinctively that nobody would believe this story. I mean, it's outlandish, you know, that you find something that works and nobody wants to learn about it. So I said, you know what? I know that it just is. So I set out to find treatments that nobody could question their effectiveness. That even though doctors might question their effectiveness, that there's no question that they work. So, by the way, I have to tell you that this wasn't right after. After Tim came home from the hospital, he lived for 3.5 more years, bedbound, incontinent, and still my husband. So I spent the next 3.5 years taking care of him. And then afterwards, it just kept gnawing at me. I've got to find other treatments to write about that can educate people and can give solutions to people that don't have them. So I wanted to write about the treatments. I wanted first I wrote an article, then I wrote a book, Honest Medicine, and I wanted to just be able to tell people about them. So let me tell you about some of the treatments I found. You can see I'm not used to doing PowerPoints. The 3 treatments are low-dose naltrexone, and I'm going to tell you about that. It's a fabulous treatment. The ketogenic diet for pediatric epilepsy, and intravenous alpha lipoic acid for liver disease, for some cancers. You know, it's pancreatic. It's had extremely good results with. So these were treatments that, as I said, nobody could argue with, that they would just be, it would be obvious that they worked, and I hoped that by writing about them, I could help a lot of people.